The street was loud, crowded, and unforgiving. Cars rushed past without slowing down. People walked by with eyes glued to their phones, earbuds in, hearts closed. No one noticed the homeless man sitting against the brick wall near the corner cafe. No one except the cold. His jacket was torn at the sleeves. His shoes were 2 sizes too big. His beard was untrimmed, his face worn down by years of being ignored. He hadn't eaten properly since yesterday morning. As footsteps passed him again and again, he finally gathered the courage to speak. "Sir." His voice cracked. "Can you give me $1?" Most people didn't even turn their heads. Some pretended they didn't hear. Some frowned in disgust. One man scoffed, "Get a job," without slowing down. Then a familiar figure approached, calm, steady, confident. Simple jeans. A dark jacket. No entourage. No spotlight. Chuck Norris. The homeless man didn't recognize him at first. To him, this was just another stranger with clean clothes and a warm future. Still, hunger pushed pride aside. "Please, just $1, he said again, barely audible. People nearby noticed who was walking past. "That's Chuck Norris," someone whispered. "Watch, he'll just ignore him like everyone else." A woman shook her head. "Celebrities don't stop for people like that." Chuck Norris slowed his steps. For a moment, it looked like he might keep walking. The homeless man's shoulders dropped. He stared at the ground, already feeling stupid for asking. Years of rejection had trained him well. Then Chuck Norris stopped completely. The noise of the street felt quieter somehow. He turned around. Everyone watched, expecting a quick handoff, maybe $1, maybe nothing at all. Some even expected him to brush the man off politely and leave. But Chuck Norris didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he looked the homeless man straight in the eyes and said calmly, "Why do you only want $1? The question caught the man off guard. The crowd leaned in. No one knew it yet, but that single question was about to change a life, and remind everyone watching what real strength actually looks like. The homeless man didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard, embarrassed that someone had actually stopped to talk to him. His eyes moved nervously to the people standing nearby, well-dressed strangers, phones half-raised, curiosity mixed with judgment. I don't like asking," he finally said. "But $1 is enough." Chuck Norris didn't rush him. He didn't interrupt. He simply stood there, listening, something the man hadn't experienced in years. The street continued moving around them. Car engines roared. A bus hissed as it stopped at the curb. But in that small space between the cafe wall and the sidewalk, time felt slower. The man took a breath and continued. "There's a coffee shop right there," he said, pointing weakly. "If I buy a small coffee, they'll let me sit inside for a while. It's warm, and nobody kicks me out." A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. One young man muttered, "At least he's honest." Chuck Norris nodded slightly. Most people thought homeless men asked for money for the wrong reasons. Drugs. Alcohol. Lies. But this man wasn't asking for comfort. He was asking for warmth, dignity, and a moment of peace. Chuck glanced around. He noticed how people stared from a safe distance. Some whispered. Some filmed quietly. Others pretended not to care but slowed their steps anyway. Fame had taught Chuck Norris something important. People see what they expect to see. To some, he was a legend. To others, just another celebrity. To the homeless man, he was simply someone who had stopped. Chuck turned his attention back to the man. "What's your name?" he asked. The man hesitated, as if names no longer mattered. "Frank," he said softly. "At least, that's what I was called." Chuck repeated it. "Frank." The sound of his own name seemed to surprise the man. He hadn't heard it spoken with respect in a long time. Frank adjusted the old blanket around his legs. "I wasn't always here," he said quietly. "I used to work construction. 30 years. No missed days. No excuses." A woman in the small crowd lowered her phone. "I fell from scaffolding," Frank continued. "Messed up my back real bad. Doctors said I'd never lift heavy again." Chuck's face stayed calm, but his eyes sharpened. Work stopped. Bills didn't, Frank said. Then came the hospital. Then the rent notices. Then the silence from people who used to call me family. The street felt heavier now. Frank laughed bitterly. Funny thing is, losing the house hurt less than losing the respect. Chuck Norris slowly sat down on the cold sidewalk beside him. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Frank panicked. "Sir, please, you don't have to." "I want to," Chuck said simply. Sitting there, at eye level, Chuck didn't look like a legend or a fighter. He looked like a man listening to another man. "I don't ask for much," Frank said. $1 buys me a little warmth, and reminds me I still exist." Chuck Norris looked at him carefully. That was the moment he made a decision. Not about money, but about humanity. And what he was about to do next would silence the street completely. Chuck Norris stayed silent for a moment after Frank finished speaking. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew this moment mattered. Around them, the crowd had grown. People slowed down. Some stopped pretending they weren't watching. A few phones were now openly recording, not for drama, but because something real was happening. A man in a business suit crossed his arms and scoffed. "Stories like this are always exaggerated," he muttered. "They all say the same thing." Frank heard it. His shoulders tensed, and his eyes dropped to the ground again, the familiar posture of someone used to defending his existence without being believed. Chuck Norris stood up slowly. He didn't look angry. He didn't raise his voice. But when he spoke, the street seemed to listen. "Do you know how many people get one injury away from losing everything?" Chuck asked, looking directly at the man in the suit. The man didn't answer. Chuck continued, his voice calm but firm. "One accident. One hospital bill. One missed paycheck." The man looked away. Frank glanced up, surprised. No one had ever defended him in public before. Another woman from the crowd spoke, half joking, half suspicious. "If you really want to help, why not just give him the $1 and go?" Chuck Norris turned toward her. "Because if I only give him $1, he said, I'm agreeing with the idea that his life is only worth $1. The words hit hard. Silence spread like a wave. Frank's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back quickly. Pride was the last thing he had left. Chuck looked back at him. "Frank, when was the last time someone looked at you and listened?" Frank thought for a long moment. "I don't remember," he said honestly. A teenage boy in the crowd whispered to his friend. "This is uncomfortable, but in a good way." Chuck reached into his pocket, not his wallet. He pulled out his phone. People exchanged looks. What's he doing? Is he calling security? Is this staged? Frank stiffened. "You don't have to call anyone," he said quickly. "I'll move." "I'm sorry." Chuck placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not calling you out," he said. "I'm calling someone in." He dialed a number and stepped a few feet away, but everyone could hear his side of the conversation. "Yes. I'm on 5th Street, Chuck said. "No, not an emergency. I need help for someone who deserves it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The man in the suit shifted uncomfortably. Chuck ended the call and returned to Frank. "You see," Chuck said, "people think strength is about walking past pain. Real strength is stopping." Frank's voice shook. "Why are you doing this for me?" Chuck met his eyes. "Because today, I'm not Chuck Norris the actor," he said. "I'm just a man who refuses to ignore another man." A car horn blared loudly, snapping everyone back to reality. The tension hung thick in the air. Whatever Chuck Norris had set in motion, it was already far bigger than $1. And the street was about to witness something none of them would forget. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some people shifted their weight awkwardly, unsure whether to stay or leave. Others leaned in closer, pulled by curiosity and something deeper, guilt, maybe. The street that moments ago felt ordinary now felt like a stage where something important was unfolding. Frank sat frozen. His hands rested on his knees, fingers trembling. He kept glancing at Chuck Norris, as if afraid the man might suddenly stand up and disappear like a dream. No one had ever made a phone call for him before. A young woman near the cafe entrance wiped her eyes quietly. "I didn't expect this," she whispered to her friend. An older man shook his head slowly. "Most of us wouldn't have even stopped." Chuck Norris stood beside Frank, not above him, beside him. That small detail changed everything. Minutes passed. Every second felt heavy. Then a dark-colored SUV pulled up to the curb. Conversations stopped. Doors opened. Two people stepped out, one wearing a jacket with a local shelter's logo, the other holding a clipboard. They looked around until their eyes landed on Chuck Norris. They walked over quickly. "Mr. Norris?" one of them asked. "Yes," Chuck replied calmly. "You called about a man needing assistance?" Chuck gestured toward Frank. "This is Frank." Frank's eyes widened. "They came for me?" he asked in disbelief. The woman from the shelter knelt down in front of him. "Hi, Frank. I'm Lisa. We have a warm bed available tonight. Food too." Frank's lips trembled. I didn't ask for all this." Lisa smiled gently. "You didn't have to." The crowd watched in silence. No applause. No cheering. Just quiet respect. The man in the business suit from earlier stepped forward slowly. I'm sorry," he said awkwardly. "I shouldn't have said what I said." Frank nodded, not out of forgiveness, but exhaustion. Chuck Norris looked at the man and said, "Let this be the moment you remember next time you pass someone." The man swallowed and stepped back. Lisa turned to Chuck. "We'll take care of him from here." Chuck nodded, then looked down at Frank. Before Frank could say anything, Chuck reached into his wallet and placed it gently in Frank's hand. Frank tried to refuse. "That's too much." Chuck closed Frank's fingers around it. "This isn't about money," he said quietly. "It's about reminding you that you still matter." Frank broke. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Chuck squeezed his shoulder once, firm, respectful. As Frank was helped to his feet, the crowd slowly began to disperse. People walked away quieter than before, their steps slower, their thoughts heavier. The street returned to motion. But something had changed. Because everyone there knew. They hadn't just witnessed kindness. They had witnessed courage. And Chuck Norris hadn't finished yet. As Frank stood between the two shelter workers, still trying to steady himself, Chuck Norris took one last look at him, not with pity, but with respect. "Wait," Chuck said. Everyone paused. The shelter workers stopped mid-step. The small crowd that had started to leave slowed again. Something in Chuck's voice told them this wasn't over. Chuck reached into his jacket pocket, this time pulling out a folded piece of paper. Frank watched nervously. "I don't understand," Frank said softly. Chuck unfolded the paper and held it out. "This is my personal contact information," Chuck explained. "Not a fan line. Not an assistant." The crowd gasped quietly. Chuck looked Frank directly in the eyes. "You're not disappearing after tonight." Frank shook his head in disbelief. "Sir, I don't even have a phone." Chuck smiled faintly. "That's going to change." Lisa, the shelter worker, looked confused. "Mr. Norris, are you sure?" Chuck nodded. "I'm sure." He turned to Frank again. "You said you worked construction for 30 years, Chuck continued. "I have friends who run rehabilitation programs, job training, medical support." Frank's breath caught. "You're serious?" he whispered. Chuck's answer was simple. "I don't make promises I won't keep." The crowd was silent now, fully locked in. A young man who had been recording lowered his phone slowly. "This isn't content anymore," he muttered. "This is real." Chuck then reached into his wallet again, but this time he didn't just hand over cash. He placed a small card in Frank's palm. "Tomorrow morning," Chuck said, "you go to this address. They're expecting you." Frank stared at the card as if it might vanish. "What if I mess it up?" Frank asked, fear creeping into his voice. "What if I can't keep up anymore?" Chuck leaned in slightly. "Falling once doesn't define you," he said. "Staying down does." Frank nodded slowly, fighting tears again. The man in the business suit spoke up, his voice quieter than before. I run a contracting company, he said. If you're willing, I can talk to my HR team. Heads turned. The same man who had mocked Frank earlier now looked humbled. Chuck glanced at him. Good, he said. Do better than yesterday. The shelter workers helped Frank toward the SUV. Before getting in, Frank turned back. His voice was shaking, but steady enough. You didn't just give me help, he said. You gave me a future. Chuck Norris gave a small nod. You always had one, he replied. Someone just needed to remind you. The SUV door closed. As it drove away, the crowd stood there in silence. No one clapped. Because some moments don't need applause. They need reflection. And that night, a single question about $1 had turned into a revelation about human worth. The SUV disappeared into traffic, its red brake lights fading into the stream of the city. For a moment, no one moved. The sidewalk felt strangely empty without Frank sitting against the wall. The cardboard sign, the worn blanket, all gone. Only a faint mark on the concrete remained, like proof that he had been there, and that his life had just changed direction. People slowly began walking again, but something about their pace was different. Quieter. Thoughtful. Chuck Norris remained standing where Frank had been moments earlier. The business-suited man cleared his throat. I meant what I said, he spoke, more to himself than anyone else. If he shows up, I'll help. Chuck looked at him. Make sure you do, he said calmly. People's hope isn't something to borrow lightly. The man nodded and walked away without another word. A woman approached Chuck hesitantly. My brother's homeless, she said softly. I haven't spoken to him in years. I didn't know how. Chuck met her eyes. Start by listening, he replied. Tonight. She nodded, wiping tears, and hurried off. One by one, small conversations sparked around the street, not loud, not dramatic, but honest. Strangers talking about shelters, family, second chances. Chuck Norris didn't stay for long. He adjusted his jacket and began walking down the street. No cameras followed him. No interviews. No speeches. Just a man leaving a place better than he found it. Later that night, Frank sat in a warm room for the first time in years. A clean bed. A hot meal. A door that locked from the inside. He stared at the ceiling, still unsure if the day had really happened. In his pocket was Chuck's card. In his hand, a future he hadn't dared imagine. The shelter staff checked on him quietly. You okay? One asked. Frank nodded. I think I finally am. Across the city, Chuck Norris sat alone at his kitchen table. He didn't think about cameras or crowds. He thought about the question Frank had asked. Can you give me $1? And how many people never ask, not because they don't need help, but because they've learned the world doesn't listen. Chuck picked up his phone and sent a single message. Tomorrow. Follow up on Frank. Make sure everything's in place. Then he set the phone down. Because real help doesn't end with a moment. It continues when no one is watching. The next morning, Frank showed up. He held the card tightly, afraid to lose it. But the doors opened. Just like Chuck said they would. And for the first time in years, Frank walked forward. Not as a homeless man, but as someone rebuilding his life. A week later, the street looked the same. Cars still rushed by. People still walked with purpose. Life didn't slow down for anyone. But for Frank, everything was different. Every morning, he woke up in a real bed, not to the sound of traffic, but to quiet. He attended medical evaluations, met counselors, and began physical therapy for his injured back. It wasn't easy. Pain reminded him daily of what he had lost. But hope reminded him of what he still had. He kept Chuck Norris's card folded neatly in his pocket, not because he needed to call, but because it reminded him that someone believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Across town, Chuck Norris never spoke publicly about that night. No interviews. No posts. No headlines. Because the greatest acts of kindness don't need an audience. What stayed behind wasn't a viral moment. It was a lesson. A lesson for the people who walked past Frank that night. A lesson for those who whispered judgments. A lesson for anyone who has ever thought, that could never be me. The truth is, it could. One injury. One illness. One wrong turn. Life doesn't always ask permission before it changes everything. Frank used to think strength meant enduring pain silently. Now he understood something deeper. Strength is asking for help when pride tells you not to. Strength is stopping when everyone else keeps walking. And strength is seeing the human before the circumstance. Chuck Norris didn't change Frank's life with money alone. He changed it with respect. By sitting down. By listening. By refusing to treat a man like a problem instead of a person. That night, the dollar didn't matter. What mattered was the moment someone said, "You still matter." And maybe that's the reminder we all need. The next time you see someone struggling, don't rush past. Don't judge. Don't assume. Because kindness doesn't always look like grand gestures. Sometimes it looks like eye contact, a conversation, a pause. And you never know. The person you help today might remember your face for the rest of their life. Or the person you ignore might be the one who needed you most. So here's the question. What kind of person do you want to be when no one is forcing you to care? If this story moved you, type respect in the comments. If you believe kindness is real strength, type humanity. And tell me, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. I read every comment, and I want to thank you personally. Because stories like this don't spread because of algorithms. They spread because someone, somewhere, still believes. That compassion can change a life. And sometimes, it only takes $1, or one moment, to prove it.